Peter begins his sermon, his talk, by letting the Israelites know of this terrible deed that they had done. Let the whole house of Israel know for certain that God has made both Lord and Christ this Jesus whom you crucified. And so right away, Peter says, this is what you did, and this is what God did. And it's hard to know exactly what cut them to the heart. I love that phrase. But if you remember my Good Friday homily, I talked about meditating below the crucifix out at St. Anne, in this voice saying, because of you, I am on the cross, And I felt cut to the heart then, Compunction, we call it sometimes in theology. But when I think of what God did, I told you the second voice I heard was, it's because of you that I'm here on the cross. It was a voice of love, That voice also cut me to the heart, I was cut to the heart by my sin, but I was also cut to the heart by God's love and the lengths that God is willing to go to save me, And cut to the heart, they say to Peter, what are we to do? And Peter says, repent and be baptized. Now, all of us have been baptized, right? Or most of us. And so what would Peter say to us? I was thinking that he would say to us, repent and remember your baptism. Because baptism, we know, is not just some honorary thing or some festive kind of thing, but it's an action that really does something. We're changed after baptism. We say, first of all, that baptism wipes away all sin. And it brings us into the church. And the third thing it does is configure us to Christ by an indelible character. That's the way it's worded in canon law. In other words, it can never be taken away. And after our baptism, we're rightly called Christians. We're configured to Christ. We belong to Christ. Right? And so, for the rest of our lives, we are to try to live into that, If you read The Messenger this week, this past issue, George Weigel has an article in there, and this is not the first time that Weigel has written about it. But in his article, he writes about remembering and celebrating your baptismal day. We all celebrate our birthdays, But I know very few people who celebrate the day that they were baptized. And Weigel is one of those who argues with others. I've heard it various times. But he's one of those who argues that the most important day of your life is your baptismal day. And he encourages people, celebrate that day. And I want to be clear, there's nothing at all wrong about celebrating your birthday. It's a beautiful thing that someone's grateful that you were born, That's a very wonderful affirmation. But isn't it somewhat typical, if I can put it this way, of us that there's something about celebrating your birthday and not your baptismal day that's a kind of mindset, And there's a certain kind of turning in on oneself about that, you know. But to celebrate the day that Jesus took away all stain of sin, original sin and any personal sin if you were baptized as an adult. But to celebrate the day that we were freed from sin and configured to Christ and brought into his church. You know, when you say it like that, I almost say, wow, why aren't we celebrating that? You know? That's a thing definitely to be celebrated. And so one of the things I want to do today, we haven't had the opportunity, of course, is to renew our baptismal promises. And usually we would have done that once or twice, at least by now, maybe more. And there's been a certain sadness for me in this. I know you all, I hear everybody saying how much you miss the Mass and Eucharist and all that, and that's fine. But what about me? Would you lift up that? Can you pan over to my broom? That broom has been dry the entire Easter season. And so have you, I guess, because I haven't had it, you know. Okay, thank you. So at any rate, without the water, I'll ask you to renew your baptismal practices in just a moment. I mean, baptismal promises. But actually, maybe that was a nice slip there. Maybe we should think about renewing our baptismal practices also. And think about ways that we can live up to the gifts that have been given us, you know. And baptism is cannot be taken away. You can never be unbaptized. And so when we celebrate the sacrament of reconciliation, we're returning to our baptismal purity, you know. And so I just encourage you. I think Weigel and others are on to something. You know. Find out when your day of baptism was and celebrate that. And maybe the celebration of it will bring to mind more often the gifts that God has given you in this, and the wonderful gifts, the irreplaceable gifts. You know. And maybe it will encourage you to live up to that confirmation to Christ or configuration to Christ more seriously.